Welcome back. I am Stephanie Ruhle. We have just learned moments ago that Bank of America, one of the largest small lenders to businesses, has opened their Paycheck Protection portal, making it the first major bank to start accepting applications for small business loans. They have over 1.6 million small business customers. But this morning, many other banks, large and small, are concerned that they are not prepared for the number of requests they are about to get. I want to bring in someone who fought hard to make sure this small business relief was part of Congress's $2 trillion relief package and is still fighting for small businesses in his home state of Florida. Republican Senator and Chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Business, Senator Marco Rubio. He joins me now. Senator, why was this so important to you?
Thank you for having me. You know, I don't think I need to convince anyone, and I certainly didn't in Congress, that small business is so important for our economy. It represents like 90% of our firms, over half our jobs, and we all know someone in this sector. So it really wasn't a heavy lift. It was a lot of work to put it all together, given the climate and the time constraints. And it was important because, again, over half the people in this country work somewhere. In fact, when you look at the people we cover in this, independent contractors, 1099, people in the gig economy, and the C3 not-for-profit sector, way over half the people in this country work for one of the eligible entities here, one of the eligible businesses or not-for-profits that are eligible for this. So, yeah, anything that covers half the employees in this country is a big deal.
Well, let's talk about who's eligible, because the $350 billion is first come, first serve. And the original language for this bill said anyone applying needs to show that they've had a 50% loss in revenue right now compared to what they had last year. So that absolutely applies to all the kind of businesses you're talking about: construction, hair salons, restaurants. But that language was changed to now essentially say anybody who has the expectation that this is going to hurt their business. That change has now opened the door for insurance companies, hedge funds, law firms, all other sorts of businesses to come in for a land grab.
Yeah, so the language changed. I'll tell you why. When we wrote that originally, it was a different time. When we started this project, it was like $50 billion. And as that week went on, more and more closures, we started to realize that virtually no business in America would be not unimpacted by it. And the result is that language came out also because we wanted to make it easy. If we went and asked the business, go up and pull your 1 year revenues, show us you're adding days and hours and you're making it more complicated. It's one of the reasons why the banks were complaining. The original forms from the SBA asked for all that stuff and made it more complicated. I agree with your view that there is the opportunity here for some people to try to come in who aren't the dry cleaner down the street or the bakery around the corner or the small restaurant, which is who we're really trying to help. And that language, those regulations are still due out. They're not out yet about what happens to us, because this is complicated. You know, the more you open this up, the more you realize the complexity of ownership out there. What happens to a truly small business who happens to have one of 5 owners that is a 20% shareholder in the company or whatever, that is an investment fund that maybe capitalized them a year ago? Because that's something we've also been encouraging, is for investment to flow towards small business. So that's what they're working to. I can tell you what the design of this was not to help fund managers, was not to help. This is not a Wall Street package. By the same token, however, there are some entities that may have some minority stake held by some investment fund. And there might be some exceptions depending on the size of that. But that hasn't been determined yet. But ultimately, I agree with your point, and that is I don't want to read headlines that the well-financed, well-capitalized companies, because of their ownership structure, were able to suck up all the money, and we ran out of money, and now we can't help the small business down the street.
Do you feel confident that you're going to create that language to prevent that from happening? Because I can promise you right now, there are tax specialists and accountants working with those hedge funds, those private equity firms to figure this out. And when they do, it's going to be like Park Avenue going to the soup kitchen because they left the door unlocked.
Yeah, let me tell you something. I'm confident that we're working with the people who write that language. But I can tell you they're hearing from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who represent parts of the country that have a lot of these funds that are trying to get in. So, I can't tell you what the final outcome is going to be, frankly, because I'm not writing the regulations. We write the legislation. They write the implementing regulations. But I'm confident that they're hearing from a lot of people across the spectrum on this deal. And you're 100% right. There are a bunch of specialists, to say the least, that are out there now coming up with language and suggestions. I will not tell you this is going to be perfect, neither the rollout nor its implementation is going to be perfect, because this is a brand new, a huge piece of legislation, brand new, never been done before, all being pushed out there. The bill is only a week old. And so, but I can tell you the alternative would have been catastrophic. We had to do something.
I know you are not in charge of the regulation or the implementation, but how concerned are you? Because the SBA is a small, slow-moving body, and these small businesses do not have 2 months of liquidity. If they don't get in this program, if they don't get the money they need in the weeks to come, they're going to shut down, and we're going to have a wave of bankruptcies across this country like we've never seen.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. And, you know, we spent the last 36 hours working with Secretary Mnuchin, because the original guidance that went out to the banks, you put up before it came on, stories that had appeared yesterday, that's what all based on letters from bankers that were saying, this is not simplified. This is very complicated. Early yesterday morning or late the night before, I sent them what some of the banks were telling me they were going to have to ask people. It was not at all the intent here. And it's always interesting to be on the phone talking to some figure in an administration or in an agency, and they're telling you their interpretation of the legislative intent, and you're telling them, I am the legislative intent. I wrote this language. I know exactly what we meant by it. I think that got fixed. I think Secretary Mnuchin deserves a lot of credit. He got involved and fixed it. The new guidance that went up live last night is very simple, and it's at this point, here's what banks have to do. They have to ask for the same information they would ask of any business that opens an account with them. And they have to verify payroll. And for millions of these businesses, they're going to the bank that they're using for their small business banking. They've already been verified. And the bank may even be doing their payroll, but if not, has insight and can look directly into their operating account. That was the design. And I think that's now reflected. Obviously, you know, we have to make sure that that reaches every level of the SBA, so that when some banker picks up the phone and calls Washington, they get that sort of guidance, not someone who's confused. So this is going to be an ongoing challenge. There's no doubt about it. But as of 8:45, 8:50 this morning, there had already been 700 of these done. And I'm very proud to say the community banks, the mid-level banks in the community, were the first ones out of the gate. And I believe the large banks will be going live here if they haven't done so already.
Once this $350 billion is spent, Secretary Mnuchin alluded to the fact there'd be more money behind it. He's not necessarily in a position to grant that, but Congress is. Are you going to have more money after this?
I think it wouldn't be hard to do. I think there'd be support for it, especially if the program is working. Obviously, the challenge is going to be we're going to have to do it through unanimous consent. In essence, the Houses and the Senate are going to have to come into session with one person who opens it up. A second person makes a motion to pass this, and it happens. We're not going to be able to reconvene in the next 4 or 5 weeks as Congress, I believe, to get this done. I think much of the country will still be under restrictions up until that point. So, but if the program is working well and people are being helped by it, and the issue becomes there's not enough money, we're running out of money to fund the demand, then I feel like there's going to be tremendous support for it. And I can't imagine anyone trying to block that. It's possible, but I don't. But I don't think the political support will be the issue. The issue is whether we can procedurally do it without, one person who's trying to make a name for themselves standing up and trying to block it.
Can we talk about your state of Florida? One of the last states, well, not all the states have participated, one of the most recent to issue this stay-at-home order. What in the world is going on down there? You got a whole lot of senior citizens, and last I checked, they're pretty high risk.
Yeah. So let me say one thing. I think for all practical purposes, we were in a stay-at-home order. Virtually every county in the state, if not every, had restrictions in place, perhaps with the exception of a handful of counties.
Senator, come on now. You and I, stop it.
Can you hear me? No, I'm serious.
Okay, but sir, hold on.
It is. I mean,
hold on, though. Those handful of counties don't have...
Okay.
But fine, wait, those handful of counties don't have walls around them. You and I both saw pictures of partiers on beaches jamming on it, right? They're not bound by those counties. They can get all over the state. Come on.
Yeah, but that was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Those are not recent images. And all of the counties that those videos reflect have issued orders and closed beaches themselves, or the cities themselves. So what I'm trying to say is, just because you didn't have a stay-at-home order doesn't mean people weren't staying home. There were orders in virtually all the large metropolitan counties. All of Southeast Florida had these orders. Duval County had these orders. Central Florida had these orders. About a week and a half ago, all of the Tampa Bay region had these orders. That said, I think the governor made the right decision now to implement that statewide, because I think it creates a level of uniformity But the governor has his preference is to defer to the local level. He did that during the hurricane response, and it worked very well. That's always the preference, right? Local officials are on the front lines and you want to give them both resources, but you also want to provide them the opportunity to decide what to do at the local level. That said, I think they made the right decision at this point yesterday with regards to it.
So you support how he's handled it. You don't think he should have done it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
You know what? Honestly, I think that we will have plenty of time to look back when this is all done and see all the mistakes that were made, all the errors that were committed at every level, starting at the CDC, congressional oversight. Maybe we should have started on the relief bill a week earlier in Congress. Right now, though, we can't stop to do that. We have to focus on the emergency that's at hand right now. And then when this is over, and we hope it'll be over sooner rather than later, it's going to take some time. I think we're going to have plenty of time to look at our response and figure out what was done right and what was done wrong. That's going to happen. Accountability needs to happen. The problem is every second we spend right now on the finger pointing and at each other is a second that we're not spending on dealing with what's before us now. We can't change the past. We can learn from it, but we can only influence the future. And so that's why I'm trying to, all across the board, sort of figure out right now what we can do. Look, when this is all said and done, we're going to have some oversight over how the agencies have implemented this and whether, why did we have to spend 36 hours arguing about legislative intent with the SBA and others. But right now, I want to focus on getting the program running. And then, we'll have time for that. That'll have to happen. We have to learn from it. But we can't stop right now to do that because we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, then, with all due respect, sir, you're not immune to finger pointing yourself. Earlier this week, you called out people that share my job. And I do have to share your tweet in its entirety, or not actually its entirety because I can't get to all of it, but I'll share just the beginning where you wrote, "Some in our media can't contain their glee and delight in reporting that the U.S. has more coronavirus cases than China. Beyond being grotesque, it's bad journalism." I need to ask you this because I'm a journalist. We're not just some personalities. You called out journalism. And I need to understand why on earth you did this.
Well, because there are some journalists that were doing exactly what I said. And I posted some of their tweets. Editorial cartoonist, I think, is considered a journalist. A columnist for GQ is considered a journalist. A magazine that's distributed, at least online, is considered journalism. And every single one of those and others had headlines about how we're number one. They got that trending last Friday. Now, that's why I use the word some, just like often I read reports about how some Republicans are doing this or some members of Congress are doing that. I don't know what other word to describe who's doing something and who isn't. And I don't know what other word to use to describe these.
But if you're criticizing people for wasting.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But, sir, just a moment ago, you said we shouldn't be wasting any time pointing fingers or criticizing. And that's exactly what you did in that tweet.
Yeah, but the difference is that this is an ongoing deal here that we're dealing with right now, and that is a Chinese propaganda effort to put out that they have handled this perfectly and we have not. And that is the national security and the national interest of the United States does not stop. Now, when the orders were not in place for the governor to do that, I didn't say people couldn't criticize the decision not to implement an order, but now that decision has been made. And in the case of that reporting, maybe it's diminished in the last few days, but there were many days out there where people were basically taking the Chinese number of 80-something thousand infections and saying, look how great they did it and look how bad we're doing it. And that's not only wrong, that's a national security issue. We know that is a propaganda influence effort that they're undertaking along with Putin and Russia and even the Iranians. And national security and the national interest of this country does not stop because that's an ongoing concern even in the midst of this crisis.